So while my daughters are sleeping, I found this video that a guy I used to watch constantly back in 2000, 2008, or 2007, 2008, 2009. Back when YouTube was very young, right? And like I used to love this guy's video, but he turned into a communist. I'll be honest with you. Now, this video is kind of a return to form for him. And let me give you a little back history on this dude. As he's been on this platform, he decided that he would take his YouTube money and go down to like South America and create a like giant, like, I don't know, I guess like grow your own food, you know what I mean, work with animals, that type of thing. And he went and did it. You know what I'm saying? Like he went and actually did it, but his family ended up getting struck with MRSA. He ended up actually like having part of his lung removed. Like it was really bad. Like it was crazy what happened to him. But I wanted to sit here and I apologize for the dog barking in the background. Fucking ass neighbors don't know how to control the animals. Right? But I wanted to stand here and show y'all like what I used to really like watch. And it's a pretty interesting video, legitimately. It's something else, legit. It's a different perspective. And you know me, man, I love giving y'all new perspective on it. So let's have this, let's listen to this. We'll talk about it a little bit as we go through, you know what I mean? We'll get to where we need to go.
Imagine 10 years ago, if someone described to you what the world would look like as we entered the 2020s, would you have believed them? Interesting times, eh? It's about to get a lot more interesting. History will remember this decade as a critical turning point, the end of an era. 2020 was the year that ideas like this went mainstream. Headlines that used to be relegated to the lunatic fringe were now being promoted by the corporate media. Credible economists warning that a banking crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, and ultimately a monetary crisis were on the horizon. Prominent researchers projecting more riots and unrest, and potentially a civil war. The UN calling for urgent action to avert a global food emergency. And world leaders warning that military conflict between the United States and China was no longer inconceivable. Then, of course, we had the COVID-19 debacle. Though the authorities would blame the disease itself, it was their ill-conceived response that actually served as the catalyst. Their short-sighted policies initiated a chain reaction. Some of the consequences of this chain reaction are inevitable, like a bullet that's left the barrel of a gun. Others hang in the balance. There will not, however, be any going back to normal. This story has a silver lining, a chance to make the world a better place. But it has to start with an honest assessment of how we got here and point to a positive course of action.
As I said, this is a different type of dude. I wish I could have the opportunity to have a conversation with him. I really do, because I really want to pick his brain and just find out what is really rattling around inside of there. Because this guy is not dumb. He's not a dumb person. Legit. And you're about to find that out here in a second. Keep rocking. And by the way, like all of his videos are copyright free. Like he says you can use them whenever you want. I mean, so feel free to like check out. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Feel free to go way back, way back, and just listen. It'll fuck you up.
In the winter of 2020, as COVID-19 went exponential, a panic was spreading even faster. Borders around the globe slammed shut in rapid succession, and the vast majority of the world's population was placed under some form of curfew or stay-at-home order. Businesses deemed non-essential were shuttered, events canceled, gatherings banned. In some countries, people weren't even allowed to go outside to exercise. The public accepted these policies at first because they were led to believe that they would only last a few weeks. But as weeks turned into months and infections soared in spite of summer temperatures, it became clear that the lockdowns were never going to eradicate this virus. At best, they would slow or delay the spread. And at what cost? Those who hatched this plan had made no provision for a pandemic that would linger on for months or years. They didn't even account for the socioeconomic chain reaction that the first round of lockdowns would set in motion.
I posted up something the other day, and it's important for y'all to remember this, all right? For every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. That's an important number that individuals really don't understand. It's highly the fuck important for everybody to understand that fact. Okay, that's a real number. It's 2 or 3 studies have actually shown this out. And we're at 1930s level fucking unemployment. It's really bad. Let's keep going.
With businesses shuttered and movement highly restricted, millions were left unemployed virtually overnight. The scale and speed of these job losses broke all previous records. Even the Great Depression didn't come close. By the summer of 2020, flashpoints of violence and social unrest were beginning to flare up in cities around the world. Pent-up frustrations were building, for obvious reasons. Billions of people had just spent months locked inside their houses. Millions had been thrown into extreme poverty. Most stress-relieving activities had been banned. Social gatherings, sports, time with friends at restaurants or bars, even places of worship were restricted. This was a powder keg waiting for a match. Politicians obviously saw the danger in this equation. When millions of people are suddenly left hungry and homeless, that's a recipe for revolution. Something had to be done, and quickly. So they did something. Boy, did they do something. When all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And the governments around the world were looking at a very, very large nail. The fiscal stimulus programs of 2020 were epic, absolutely off the charts. By June, over 18 trillion had been dispersed globally. Some of the stimulus came in the form of checks sent directly to every single taxpayer. In the US, these checks shipped with an autograph, Donald J. Trump, so you would know who to thank. Unemployment benefits were also expanded in many countries. In the United States, for example, unemployed workers were given an extra $600 a week. This meant that many were earning more staying home than they had been on a job. In fact, personal income in the United States soared by 10.5% in April, the largest monthly increase ever recorded. Then there were the forgivable loans via the Paycheck Protection Program and similar schemes around the world, which were supposed to help prop up.
30% of those individuals who took those loans went bankrupt. Just so we can put that out there. 30% of those fucking companies went bankrupt. Just to, let everybody know what that is.
Small businesses. Some of these loans ended up being extended to some rather strange small businesses. For example, the Church of Scientology got a check, as did the Catholic Church, which landed a nifty 1.4.
Literally don't care. This is kind of irrelevant bullshit, right? Just to go, oh man, nobody had control over me. Yeah, this is incompetence. This isn't, them being malevolent towards you. It's just fucking, they're terrible at their jobs. Government workers are awful at their jobs. They always have been, they always will be. See, I get really fucking, I got the fact that you're going, look, man, nobody really even knows where the money's going, or hey, look how evil this is, or whatever it is. I don't like cheap theatrics to prove your fucking point. It's fucking unnecessary. Legitimately. It really isn't. This shit is, it's way worse than you could think. You don't have to be unnecessarily over the top about this. I get it. You want to win. I feel you. We all want to win this ideological battle. Let's keep going.
$4 billion, some of which was distributed directly to dioceses which were facing bankruptcy due to clergy sex abuse settlements. In the UK, their version of the program approved a loan of £340,000 to a company that hosts sex parties for the rich and famous. Seriously, you can't make this shit up. These policies were obviously going to send national debts parabolic, but the reckoning would be delayed, at least for a little while. Central banks played a critical role in this delayed reckoning. As the historic stock market crash of February 2020 was unfolding, the Federal Reserve and their counterparts abroad were swinging their hammers in new and creative ways. injecting liquidity, aka money, into the system via asset markets. If you've never heard of quantitative easing, or QE, you might want to look that up. The short version is that when central banks purchase assets, new money is created. The money that is transferred to the asset holder's account is literally typed into existence. These asset holders typically reinvest this new money, causing asset prices, including stocks, to rise.
Okay, so why would an asset holder reinvest that money instead of taking it as profit? Because those asset holders are 401ks and pension funds. That's why. All right, understand something. See, this is where like the shit goes off the rails. Right? Because like when you really want to get into this type of shit, you need to start talking about the problem of all of our retirements and all of Americans' retirements being tied to this. Because just recently, we had a new record number of 401k millionaires. Because what do? They make money, they get dividends, and then once they get those dividends and they make money, it gets reinvested directly back in, right? And directly back in. And that's why it is that they're funding, that's why they're buying all these, assets from these companies and, the corporate denominated bonds and pension bonds and municipal bonds. This is why, right? Because like legitimately it's the easiest way to continue to just turn money out and keep the population remotely fed. Because the older generation will take care of some of the younger generation, and they're the ones who pay the majority of taxes in these local municipalities, because the younger people don't own fucking homes because they can't afford them. That's just the reality of the fact. But the issue is you're propping up an asset bubble at the moment with the housing crisis coming up.
Poor people don't typically own these kinds of assets, so it's basically welfare for the rich. And while it's wonderful that we can provide such a nice safety net for the upper crust of society, it does have...
Again, it's not the upper crust of society. These are just individuals who worked their whole lives and put a bunch of money back, right? These are normal middle class individuals. It's not, they're the upper crust of society at this point. But if you think about it this way, right? If you retire at 65 and you live to 85, you're going to spend $1 million if you spend 50 grand a year. $50,000 a year for 20 years is $1 million. You don't think you're going to spend that prescriptions and medical expenses, housing costs, property taxes, electricity, food, kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, cars, maintenance, all the basic aspects of life? You don't think you're going to spend 50 grand a fucking year? That's 20 years, that's $1 million. That's some shit you don't think about. It's important to understand that fact. These are real numbers. And to understand, like, if you have $1 million in your 401k, you're not rich. You're middle class, barely. You're still going to be struggling to get by and clipping coupons.
One little side effect. Inflating markets with liquidity creates asset bubbles. It's like filling up a water balloon more and more till it's so big that you can see through it.
Oh, that is a really cool fucking picture. How did that nigga get inside that motherfucking balloon? Like, first off, right? Secondly, like, was he holding his breath the whole fucking time? Like, how long did it take to fill that motherfucker up? Like, that is just, that is some insane shit. Like, that is a cool fucking picture. I saw that when I was watching this video earlier, and I wanted to, fucking mention that. Yeah, it's fucking cool.
Sooner or later, it always pops. It also has the effect of increasing wealth inequality, but hey, that's a feature, not a bug. The first round of QE started in 2009, after the housing bubble collapsed. Cutting interest rates to zero just wasn't enough. 2020 brought us round 4, affectionately referred to by some as QE Infinity. In this round, the Fed would take their liquidity.
And let me put this. Right, let me put this way too about this wealth inequality nonsense that people speak. Right, there's not that many human beings who actually make more than 250 grand a year. There's really not. Like, once you get above that level, you start talking about a handful of people. Like, the amount of individuals who actually earn $1 million a year is like 1,000 people. And a bunch of them are NFL players and shit. Sports figures, athletes, fucking celebrities, things of this nature, right? Because, like, when it comes down to it, the individuals, who like run Google and Walmart and all these companies, You have to remember, unless they sell those stocks that they're sitting on, they're really not making any money. Their money's all electronic. Like Bill Gates. Bill Gates had to come up with $90 billion. Like, he'd literally fucking go bankrupt. That's just the reality of the thing. And this is the problem. Is that we don't discuss things in reality. We discuss things in these verbose terms. And it's unnecessary. And we really should stop doing it.
Liquidity experiment to a whole new level. Buying financial assets never touched during QE 1, 2, or 3, including corporate debt and ETFs. In 1 month, they purchased more assets than they had during the entire first year following the 2009 crisis. By the end of May, they had over $7 trillion worth sitting on their books. This new money fueled the most powerful stock market rally in history. Retail investors piled in. Even the stocks of companies that had declared bankruptcy were flying high. What could possibly go wrong? With unemployment numbers still hovering at Great Depression levels, and hopes of a quick V-shaped recovery evaporating, all eyes were on governments and central banks. The question was not if there would be more stimulus and money printing. The real question was how big it would be this time. Would it be enough? No one seemed to be asking what would happen if they went too far. Our fearless leaders had painted themselves into a corner at this point. If unemployment benefits, mortgage forbearance, and eviction moratoriums weren't extended, they would soon be facing millions of homeless, hungry, and angry people. With violence and unrest already smoldering in many major cities, this would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. Extending these protections, however, would not be without a price. Eviction moratoriums and mortgage forbearance programs had temporarily prevented millions from being suddenly made homeless. But with no rent coming in, landlords would soon be defaulting on mortgages en masse, as would many homeowners and businesses. This tsunami of defaults and bankruptcies would shake the foundations of the banking system, which would of course prompt further interventions. But as governments and central banks reached for bigger and bigger bailout hammers, a monetary reckoning was rapidly approaching, and the dollar's world reserve currency status was in play.
Okay, so this is the part of the video where things are going to get reckless. So let's touch on a bunch of the shit he just said. All right, so like, yo, we're all waiting for the boog. All of us, like, yo, all of us, everyone who watches me, everybody in this community, every last one of us cannot wait for the boog to start. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wants to LARP and pretend like you want to be that dude out here, you know, doing that ridiculous nonsense. And like, nobody wants to pretend that you want the world to end. That's important to know. Like, that's an important thing to state when it comes down to it. That's something that, you know, I don't want to have to pull the trigger against another human being. I don't want this to be the world that I leave to my children. I don't want to die. But on the same point, if it is going to come, let it come now when I'm young enough to still handle it. Kind of my mentality. And we can rebuild something better. That's kind of the mental that I get down to. But anyway, let's get into this crazy nonsense he's about to spout off. And then the last of it, which is fucking brilliant, but like, I don't know. I just don't know. Let's keep going.
For decades, the dollar's world reserve currency status had enabled Washington to run up its national debt at everyone else's expense and punish any nation that didn't toe the line with unilateral sanctions. This era of exorbitant privilege, however, was coming to an end. A growing hub of powerful countries had been organizing behind the scenes for years. The groundwork for currency insurrection was already laid. Russia and China were the driving forces of this insurrection. For years, both countries had aggressively increased gold reserves and offloaded U.S. debt in a gradual process of de-dollarization. However, in 2018, they crossed the Rubicon. Russia by launching an alternative to the SWIFT payment system, which allowed countries to bypass U.S. sanctions, and China by introducing the petro-yuan, which would compete directly with the petrodollar. China was also in the process.
Okay, so we had to get back to fundamentals with this one here. All right, so China's ability to like actually keep that petro-yuan going as a whole is pretty pretty sketchy as far as shit's really concerned. Like the ability of it to actually be productive, I guess would be the word I'm looking for here. Viable. Yeah, viable. They'd have to legitimately have secure shipments of oil going in and out of China. And it's just not going to happen, right? With them sitting here skirmishing with India on a regular basis, and India sitting directly in front of the Persian Gulf on, directly in the pathway, and Japan able to interrupt any shipments that China's getting. And Russia's a basket case. Look at 1% of their population has AIDS. 10% of their population is hooked on heroin. So, no. Again, we have to have a real conversation about this. It's important that we talk about Russia in its proper sense. Russia doesn't have the ability to do anything. Like, the only thing Russia has is control over Europe because of the energy system that's going on. But really, if Europe decided to get off its ass, it could fight Russia off. It could defeat Russia because Russia just doesn't have the population. So let's keep going.
Of developing a digital currency that bypassed the need for banks altogether. Transfers relied only on an app on your phone. By July of 2020, China was already testing this new currency at scale. It was only a matter of time before the digital yuan would be competing with the US dollar globally. It was this emerging threat to the dollar that motivated Washington to...
Okay, let's talk about the digital yuan real quick. The population of China has no faith in their currency. So the moment that China tried to open up their currency to move it around the world, it fleed, right? People in their yuan fleed. They fucking ran as far as they could away from China, right? And once you have a digital currency, it's going to be the same thing. It'll happen again. This is the problem. Legit, is that they just don't have the ability to do any of this. And on top of that, with the amount of debt that China has in itself, not American debt, its own debt. Its debt pile is just it's Enron on just the size of it is unbelievable. No. Okay, they don't have the ability long term to be able to have a stable currency.
Lash out in a series of desperate and ill-conceived provocations. For example, the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, which the U.S. Congress passed with a veto-proof margin and was signed by Trump on July 14th, represented a serious escalation. By imposing sanctions on any individual, company, or bank which did business with Chinese officials enforcing a new security law, this legislation set the stage for Washington to cut China's access to the dollar, a move which would ultimately divide the world into yuan and dollar-based currency blocks. Spoiler alert, doesn't end well for Uncle Sam.
China is fully reliant upon the United States for trade transportation or for trade security. This is the problem with being a nation who is reliant upon imports and is an export-driven economy and doesn't have a fucking navy. The only reason that China has any ability to be what it is today is because the United States allows it to be so. China's not a threat to the United States. The world's largest paper tiger that has ever existed. China's not the problem. The United States is the problem. The technocracy is the problem. The rising aristocracy inside of the United States is the issue. It's the unelected leaders of companies that have too much control over what the American citizens' freedoms and ability to conduct business are. That's the problem at the moment.
Economic provocations were accompanied by multiple rounds of good old-fashioned saber rattling. On July 13th of 2020, when the Trump administration announced that the U.S. had decided to reject nearly all of China's claims in the South China Sea, what this really meant was that the U.S. was going to intentionally violate airspace and waters around the artificial islands that China had built up in the disputed zone, essentially daring the Chinese to do something. It's worth noting that by this time these islands were fully militarized and operational, complete with ports, runways, and other facilities that gave the Chinese a clear strategic advantage. At this stage, the rest of the world was beginning to suspect that Uncle Sam was experiencing some form of cognitive decline. He wasn't playing four-dimensional chess here. He didn't even seem to be playing with the full deck. This was like a drunk guy poking a tiger with a stick. Probably not going to end well. The provocations would continue on multiple fronts. Embassies ordered to close, Chinese companies sanctioned or banned from operating in the US. Anything and everything connected to China was open game. China condemned each of these provocations, but they didn't take the bait. Their response would come when it was in their strategic interest. They would choose their own timing. If direct conflict could be averted long enough, the US was likely to collapse on its own. The war could be won without firing a shot. As often happens when a declining empire is faced with an ascending rival, the United States was rushing headlong into Thucydides' trap. Those in power tend to try to stay in power by any and all means. When all else fails, pick a fight. Would it be China, Iran, some country on Russia's border? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Meanwhile, back in the US of A, the violence and mayhem in the streets was intensifying. Businesses, government buildings, and vehicles had been burning virtually every night for months on end. Protesters and counter-protesters were now bringing semi-automatic weapons to the scene. By September, there were multiple fatalities on each side. Perception of these events was increasingly polarized. The left and the right were no longer behaving like political factions of a nation. They had devolved into hostile tribes fighting for control of a territory. A radicalized strain of thought that directly endorsed violence as a political tool was metastasizing among a new generation of activists. A growing contingent had convinced themselves that they could win in an armed conflict. This was a serious miscalculation. Here humanity approached a crossroad. Probabilities were coalescing as the crisis progressed. Those who saw the stakes would feel an urgency. With every moment of inaction, the likelihood of a tragic ending increased. Something had to be done. But what? What could an ordinary individual do to improve the outcome? Could the trajectory of history really be altered?
Okay, so is the United States a falling empire? Yes. Right? Have we reached the peak and then started to climb back down? I forget his name. God damn, he was a French guy. I forget his name, but he said history is full of examples of wooden slippers heading up the steps as cloth slippers go down. Right? Basically, it's a principle of it's rich societies falling as poorer societies and individuals who have the strength and wherewithal to handle their business go and do so. And I think we're probably about that point, but not militarily. Militarily, we can handle the whole world taking us on at a shot. It's not a really big deal. The only problem is inside of our nation and who we are. That's a bit of a problem right now. Because short of them going full totalitarian, which is looking like they're heading in that direction, there's no way, legitimately, there's no way that they're going to be able to cap this off without really, really sitting down, having a real conversation about what's going on with the American people.
Some questions are best answered with a riddle. Rather than predicting what comes next, let's tell a story. The story has multiple endings, and you get to choose. It's been said that every nation is 3 meals away from a revolution.
9 meals. It's 9 meals. It's not 3, it's 9 meals. Every nation is 9 meals away from generation. That's 3 days. Right? That's what the saying is. It's not 3 meals away, 9 meals away from a revolution. Just to get that out there.
Never before had this principle been tested in so many countries simultaneously as it was in the 2020s. At first, many held on to the hope that everything would soon go back to normal. But as the long-term realities of the decade set in, more and more people would come to the same startling conclusion. The authorities were out of their depth. There was no exit strategy. The situation was not under control. In the early stages of the crisis, when the first few governments were collapsing, very few realized how the conflux of economic, geopolitical, and social variables were coalescing as a perfect storm. But when G20 nations started dropping like flies, the phenomenon became impossible to ignore. Like dominoes falling, the collapse of one major economy destabilized every country connected to it. In the age of globalization, very few would be spared. What began as a trickle suddenly accelerated as the downfall of the US dollar precipitated an unprecedented shock to global supply chains. Imports ground to a halt around the world. In countries dependent on outsourced food production and manufacturing, this translated into widespread shortages and social unrest. In this environment, extremist movements of all stripes flourished. A small handful of nations would weather this storm peacefully. Rather than tearing themselves apart from within or transforming into totalitarian dictatorships, they would unify and adapt. As economic and monetary shocks disrupted global supply chains and trade, these countries would quickly reorganize their economies to replace imports with local production, starting with food and essentials. Reducing dependence on fossil fuels was an important element of this transition.
Okay, so this is not a bad mentality. And again, it all depends on where you are. And that fossil fuel shit. So this is what I'm saying about this commie bullshit that he fucking moved into. It all, like, taking advantage of whatever you have around you is important, right? Legitimately. So, like, in the United States, we have plenty of oil. So, like, petro energy is not a problem here, right? We have massive amounts of natural gas. Not using it would literally be counterproductive here. It would be fucking retarded. It would be the dumbest thing you could possibly do is not to use the resources at your disposal because you want to stand here and be a fucking crusader. Stop being dumb. You know, I mean, when you're starving, legitimately, any piece of meat is a fucking meal. You can't be choosies. All right? Beggars can't be choosers. It just is what it is. Choosies. You can't be choosies, right? And, but yes, I talk about, local food production constantly. Constantly. This is why I'm always bringing this up. Legit, you should be eating where you live. It's that simple. Your stores should be full of your groceries. That basic. I understand, like, you can't get peaches and oranges, but you know what? You can set up greenhouses and grow them year round. It can happen. On a large scale, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's something that can be tried. But like be something trade with, the South as far as things are really concerned. But if you live up north, you live in the United States, if you live pretty much anywhere, legit, you should be growing food where you. That way, you're not so reliant upon the system, right? Like you have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And anytime that foot inside of the fucking circle gets too goddamn hot, you can pick it up and put it outside of the circle and live for a little bit on your own. It's important that be adaptable. Sorry, my microphone cut out. So anyway, let's keep going.
To accomplish this feat, every aspect of modern life was reimagined. Lawns were replaced by gardens. Golf courses converted to orchards.
All right, let me be real about this. A lot of this is like people mad at their dads and mad at whites, right? Because like individuals, there's a lot of people out here who were trained in a very 80s and 90s George Carlin-esque New York City, like mentality, right? There were still middle class white folks like this dude was, but like they sat here and they bought everything hook, line, and sinker about how terrible like all these rich country club individuals on the golf course are, and like shut up. Just shut up. It's not a parking lot. You know what I mean? Like it's not a city block where there's infestations of roaches and bed bugs. The golf course, grass and trees and deer and groundhogs and raccoons and animals and birds and fish. That's good to have. I understand, like, you have been taught a bunch of nonsense that's wrong, but you should probably re-up your thinking. Just try it a little bit, please.
Waste streams were recuperated to minimize losses. It wasn't easy, but these countries pulled through. And before the decade was over, they were building regional trade networks that hadn't existed before the crisis. A lot of wealthy countries didn't do so well in the second phase of the crisis, the part where a real hardship kicked in.
Now look, why would you be fleeing to Mexico? Right? Legit. Like, you live in the greatest country on the planet, geographically speaking. Like, fuck the politics. Like, geographically speaking, there is no other country like America. Right? You have more navigable waterways than the rest of the world combined. The Midwest produces more food with less inputs than anywhere else in the world. Why would you go to a desert? Like, legit. Why? I can understand, like, the Mexicans going home and them going, no, you're not coming in here. But why, as an American, would you go there? It's not the land fault. It's not the country's fault. Like, this is the leftist retarded mentality because they don't understand things. They're just taught stupidly about stuff. Legitimately. Like, they work extra hard because they're taught dumb stuff in their belief structures that's just categorically wrong in every scientific manner.
Populations accustomed to easy living and constant entertainment had a very short fuse. As shortages and rationing became the new normal and homeless encampments grew, protests would morph into riots, armed uprisings, and civil wars. Governments that were ill prepared for these challenges crumbled quickly, some into the hands of populist movements, others to military juntas. In most cases, the replacement was more brutal and repressive than the old system. The underlying paradigm was rarely questioned at all. Many regimes would extend their lifespans by totalitarian means. Emergency powers established under lockdown would prove invaluable here. Policies previously justified by public health would now be implemented in the name of national security. Control mechanisms adapted and repurposed to crack down on dissidents. It was every petty dictator's wet dream, granular control over every aspect of human behavior and interaction. No one allowed to gather without permission, every contact tracked and traced. If you're outside, you better be prepared to show your papers. This approach was most effective when the latent fears and hatreds of a population could be rallied against an enemy. Convince the people that they are under attack, and it's easy to unify them under a flag. Rather than rioting in the streets, impoverished youth can be conscripted into the military, their identities shattered and remolded, conditioned to obey, trained to kill on command. Send them abroad to steal land and resources, use them at home to crush dissent. War is, after all, the health of the state. Regardless of which axis prevailed in these conflicts, the result would be the same. A new totalitarian order was the universal prescription, the only cure for the chaos. The world's first truly global currency would replace the dollar. This currency would be completely digital. Coins and banknotes phased out. Every single transaction conducted using this currency would be recorded on a blockchain. Unlike the original cryptocurrencies, this blockchain was controlled by a central authority and monitored with AI. Economic privacy was a thing of the past. It was the holy grail of the ruling elite, the precursor for global governance with teeth. But before they even had time to properly congratulate themselves, their house of cards was catching wind. As living conditions deteriorate and fear and uncertainty prevail, certain psychological forces are always unleashed. These forces are like the incoming waves of a tsunami. Once they gather momentum, there can be no stopping them. Throughout history, there have been individuals and movements who rode these waves, channeling the tides of human sentiment towards a course of action. Though the science of crowd psychology is complex and nuanced, the application of its principles is mind-bogglingly simple. So simple, in fact, that intellectuals typically recoil from them, while bona fide idiots wield them easily and to great effect.
Welcome to Pnoid News. You're listening to Tom Pnoid right now. But yo, real shit, he's about to talk about Edward Bernays and stuff. I bring you this stuff so you can understand how they move. It's important. Fucking highly important.
Like riding a tsunami on a surfboard, attempting to redirect the momentum of a society is highly dangerous. The crowd can lift a leader to great heights, but one mistake can leave them hanging from a lamppost. Those who manage to navigate these forces usually guard the formula carefully. Failure to do so would threaten the foundations of their power. This time around, however, humanity flipped the script. In the age of the internet, the science of crowd psychology and color revolutions had been available to the public for some time now, but very few saw the utility in studying it. However, as the 2020s progressed, and it became more and more clear that those in power were pushing civilization towards a dystopian nightmare, a contingent of activists would reverse engineer the tools being used against them. The work of Gustave Le Bon and Edward Bernays would be modernized and tempered with a cultural code, the positive application of human instinct. The instinctual psychology of our species can be harnessed for good or for evil. In the modern era, it has been weaponized by the military-industrial complex for regime change and by corporations for marketing and public relations. The same principles, however, can be applied to create rather than destroy. Visions and values can spread like viruses, from mind to mind.
Okay, look. Again, we get back to white people from the suburbs who have just swallowed Mao and Marx full stop, right? Corporate advertising. Corporate advertising is productive, right? It does create. When you have economies of scale, because you have a population of scale. And the more individuals you're able to feed with this population and production, the better off your society is. It's that basic, right? And what you're talking about and what we're going to be discussing is going to be on a small scale mentality. That's important to understand. The sizes and proportions are not equal. Keep going.
And from place to place, the contagion of a single idea can inspire generations towards a new paradigm. Topple a government is surprisingly easy when conditions are right. Silver spoon politicians who've never worked a day in their life can easily lose the respect and obedience of military and law enforcement. When that happens, it's game over. The question that always comes up in such events, usually as an afterthought, is what will you replace the old system with? There is nothing more dangerous than armed men with utopian dreams. Sometimes a cure can be worse than a disease. History provides many cautionary tales. To avoid the trap of oppressed rising up to become the oppressor, the paradigm that facilitates this dynamic has to be questioned. The vast majority of modern governments, businesses, and organizations utilize a social structure called vertical collectivism. Vertical collectivism is a top-down system of organizing human groups which amplifies power by stacking layers of authority in pyramids. The result is a highly stratified society where those on the bottom have little or no say and are left to fight over the scraps from above.
So a meritocracy. A meritocracy. Just so we know what we're talking about here.
Vertical collectivism is apolitical. Capitalist companies and communist regimes both use it without contradiction, as do republics that call themselves democracies. The vertical model was born of military strategy. A general or warlord alone can only control a small army, but by using subordinate officers and layers of rank, a single individual or small ruling class can dominate millions of people in vast territories. This is why a state is often defined as the monopoly on violence within a region. Vertical collectivism didn't spread to every corner of the globe because it improved people's lives. In fact, modern anthropologists acknowledge that the transition to this way of life was associated with reduced life expectancy and a decline in virtually all measures of health up until very recently. Vertical collectivism spread like a cancer because it is brutally effective in the context of war. Every culture that it encountered was either crushed on the battlefield or forced to copy the model to survive. The dawn of civilization, as many euphemistically refer to it, is a story of conquest and colonialization that began approximately 10,000 years ago and continues to this day. This was not, however, the beginning of the human story. For over 300,000 years, long before the first empires of Asia and Europe began to absorb surrounding tribes, humans organized themselves using a very different model. Rather than building top-down stratified societies that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of an upper class, these cultures organized horizontally. Organizing horizontally didn't mean that there were no leaders. The authority and conformity instincts are far older than humanity. Like all social animals, our species is hardwired to follow those who demonstrate courage and intelligence. However, in horizontal societies, disparities of wealth and power were significantly smaller. The leaders and councils responsible for group decisions.
They're significantly smaller because they're significantly smaller numbers. The largest tribe that you may talk about when it comes down to this mentality, right? Because, like, this is pre-Inca, this is pre-Aztec, pre-Sumerian, right? This is far behind all of this, right? The largest tribe that you're talking about might be 400 or 500 people, top end, right? Because once you start getting into a larger, population, you require more of a political stratus, more of a political architecture, more of a logistical ability to be able to feed those individuals. That's where the disparity starts becoming a problem, because individuals who are able to feed a whole bunch of people will be given a larger share of things so that they continue to feed people. Like, that's how it operates, right? That's what everything is really about. Now, I'm with your ideology of going back to smaller units of individuals and, having, smaller communities and being more, family and community oriented. Like that, I am fully behind, right? Like, that's something that I speak about often, like we always talk about no-go zones and things of this nature, right? So at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we have the ability to really do these type of things,
We're not insulated by armies and law enforcement, conditioned to obey without question. Defense and order were maintained by an armed citizenry, bound by a code of conduct. This dynamic forced leaders to be directly accountable to the population. Their power was rooted in their ability to communicate with the people, build consensus, and chart a course of action to the benefit of all. The fact that horizontal societies required leaders to work with the public in such a personal way had one obvious disadvantage. It limited the size of the group. After all, why would someone voluntarily follow someone far away that they had never met? There is, however, a way around this limitation. By forming federations, horizontal societies can expand their sphere of influence significantly. An example of this adaptation can be found in the Iroquois Confederacy, which unified 5 tribes for hundreds of years in a region that came to be called New York. Each member tribe in the Confederacy had their own culture and internal governance, but a set of shared values enabled them to cooperate economically and militarily. If one tribe was attacked, they quickly mounted a common defense. Many historians believe that the United States federal system was based on the Iroquois model. One significant difference, however, was that the Iroquois had no central government. There was a central council comprised of representatives from each tribe, but this council had no power to enforce its will. Each representative was tasked with building a consensus that would resonate with their people. A modernized adaptation of this Iroquois model gained traction in the mid-2020s as the gears of globalization ground to a halt.
Okay, see, here's the thing. See, I'm from this area, right? And, I know these people, right, as a whole. Like, I know these individuals. And I know their history. And they went to war quite often, to believe it or not. Last of the Susquehannock tribe was wiped out by some of these, not by, white men, but by other Indians, Native Americans, as it were. Either, I don't really care, like, whatever. Just call an orange a lime. It doesn't really matter. Like, whatever. They're no longer here. But yeah, like, that's kind of important to understand that mentality as a whole, right? To know that they still constantly went to war and were constantly doing battle with each other. Like, it doesn't reverse your need for centralized power, which they still had. And the centralized power still, gathered up military individuals, did what they had to do. And by the way, most of these individuals, like when you did something bad, the punishment was death. So, yeah, like, it is what it is, right? But like, the punishment of death was from your tribe, right? And, like, your tribe will be left alone for the most part. And I'm behind this ideology. I really am. I like this mentality. This is basically the Articles of Confederation when it comes down to it. I'm with the mentality, but the problem is that, like, there's too many damn people at this point. There's too much industry involved. There's too much trade involved to not have this be unworkable as a loose confederation. And as long as women vote, they're going to continue to want more and more and more your freedoms taken away so that they can feel safe. That's really where the problem comes down to.
While governments proved incapable of solving the most basic problems, decentralized networks were replacing the system from the ground up. They would start by organizing local food production in their communities and gradually expand cooperation to other sectors. Their revolution was driven by an idea worth spreading. Not only was it possible to live on this planet without destroying it, this way of life was more abundant and more fulfilling than the alternative. There was no need to wait for governments to act. Humans were perfectly capable of organizing themselves. Those that succeeded became epicenters of a new renaissance, attracting skilled workers and artists from around the world. Some of these travelers would put down permanent roots. Others would return to their homeland to plant seeds of their own. From the fragments of fallen empires, new nations would be born. From the ashes of dying cultures, new cultures would rise. The great collapse of the 2020s was not the end of the world. It was the end of an era and the dawn of a new one. Remember how we said this story has multiple endings? We're going to take one of them to a literal extreme, and we're going to do it in the real world. Now, if you're living in a crowded city center, maybe pushing the boundary starts by planting a garden in your front yard, organizing a community compost, or speaking out against a war. However, it's important to understand that in the era that we have entered, the stakes are rising, and the trajectory we're on needs to be altered significantly. This implies fundamental changes in the way we live, not just gestures in the right direction. You have to decide what kind of story you and your family want to be a part of. In some cases, this might involve immigrating to another country. Others will be more inclined to stay and fight to change the outcome at home. One way or the other, you'll want to be in a place where you can grow food, and you'll want to be set up to do this without agrochemical inputs or fossil fuels. You also don't want to be reliant on the grid. Utilities can and will go down. Some will be shocked by how long they can stay down. These aren't the kind of lifestyle changes you want to make at the last moment, or put off until you can do something large scale. Far better to start transitioning to a new way of life right now. Do what you can with what you have. Join forces with others to amplify. The learning curve for this kind of transition can be steep. There are a lot of practical skills that we should be taught in school, but aren't. Most kids, when they graduate, don't know how to build a house, or grow a garden, or even how to make bread. The best way to learn this stuff isn't really in a classroom anyway. People learn best by example, anchored with hands-on experience. That's why we built this place. You could think of it as an experiential learning center / makerspace. This whole landscape is a laboratory. Here we can put ideas to an extreme test. Rather than just reading about this stuff or watching a presentation, volunteers and travelers from all over the world come here to try it themselves. They get their hands dirty in the field, planting plants, working with animals, building crazy structures like these. They also get to experience firsthand what it takes to self-organize and live in a different way. The experience is extreme because the challenges we face are real. We're completely off-grid here. Our electricity comes from the sun. We have running water by pumping from the spring up to a tank on the hill. It's also up to us to maintain the road and the drainage. Up here, when there's a problem, we have to put our heads together and find a way to solve it. To put this in perspective, our first long-term volunteer was here when we sustained a direct hit from Hurricane Maria. He also assisted in the recovery and became part of the story. Talk is cheap. If you really want to change the world, you have to be able to show people how. We're doing this here in the Commonwealth of Dominica because these people are moving in the right direction, and their culture holds some of the keys to the solution. But wherever you decide to make your stand, now is the time to get serious about food security. Our challenge in the next phase is to grow more and develop local production systems to replace imports. Some will have a chance to collaborate on site. Others will integrate this information and use it creatively, writing themselves into the story in unpredictable ways. You'll find sources, links, and bonus footage at stormcloudsgathering.com. If you pay close attention and pause often, you'll discover Easter eggs. If you agree with this message, it's up to you to make it spread. But rather than just clicking the share and like buttons, take a few minutes to download the video and make a copy. Rather than just sending a link to your friends, sit people down and watch it with them. You have permission to present or distribute this content through any medium or venue. Speaking of venues, in this age of algorithmic censorship, we've been forced to develop a new distribution strategy. If you want to keep in touch with us, you can now subscribe to our Telegram channel at Stormclouds Gathering. We've also created a Telegram group you can join at the Resilience Network to connect with others working on projects in the real world. You can also sign up for email notifications on our website. We want to end by saying thank you to those who donated to support our work. Because of you, we were able to get new solar panels, batteries, and components which enable us to power these facilities. We can even run a washing machine and a fridge now. In this next phase, we are building and purchasing equipment for food production and processing. If you want to help pull this project forward, you can donate at stormcloudsgathering.com/donate.
Well, fellas, you know what I'm saying? I want to stand here and thank you for watching my video. I'm saying if you're interested in more content from this dude, make sure his link is in the description. You know, I always put the links in the description for anything that I use. I want to make sure that individuals get credit for what they do. This guy legitimately, how do I put this? He's putting his money's where his mouth is. And I always respect that in any man as far as things are really concerned. And I think every man should do that. And I'm always about local production of agriculture and food. I always think that, like, local, you should be eating as much stuff locally, and it contributes to your culture as a whole and your heritage, which links you together with your community tighter. And that's an important thing to have, because you have to have some basis for what you are and who you are, and have it not just be about what you did today to make money. Anyway, yo, look, I'm Tom Peace and Pnoid News. Y'all know the deal. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace be like one. Later.